My name is Carlos Morales. I will be performing the speech on war in the Middle East. War, something that has been around since the existence of man. Countless wars, countless battles within those wars, victories, losses, depending on what side of the fence you are on. Allow us to turn back the hands of time, taking us back 19 years to the year of 2001, a year that most Americans will never forget. Many of us, including myself, were only babies, with no recollection of where we were at or of what we were doing with our families when that tragedy occurred. We are of course talking about the unfortunate event of 9/11, the day that would ultimately resort to the United States waging war on terrorism, a war that we still fight to this day. This means that American troops have been sacrificing, fighting, and dying on foreign soil basically ever since I have been born. Everybody who was old enough to understand what was going on at that time remembers where they were at or what they were doing when they found out about this act of terrorism. For many, it was a calling to be the first to defend our Constitution, which led them into joining the armed forces to protect our country and its people. I bring you all here today to speak about where the darkest things of what another human being can do to another and where it takes place. We are talking about war. We, of course, are not talking about any war, however. We are talking about the ongoing war that has plagued the Middle East with terror and violence. The same war that a lot of us have probably had some sort of family that is either fought or is currently fighting in order to keep us safe. Nowadays, Americans are still very separated in terms of their political views and moral values. Instead of agreeing to disagree, most people in America either stand on the far left or they stand in the far right. Very few, however, are smart enough to do what we did when this tragedy happened, and that is meeting in the middle. I was not old enough to see it for myself, but the ones who were there speak of how great and how inspiring it was to see all Americans come together as one. At that time, it did not matter who you were voting for. It did not matter where your moral values aligned. It did not matter if we agreed on the same policies. None of this mattered. What mattered at that time was coming together as one and coming to the conclusion of we love our country. What are we as Americans going to do about this? Which is in fact what weighed in the heavy decision of protecting the nation we built by leaving our homes and going overseas straight into where the heart of terrorism lies, the Middle East. The beginning of the war was horrific to say the least. War itself is truly horrifying, but this was a war like we have never seen before. Going into a completely new environment that we are not used to is always one of the greatest challenges. In World War II, it was urbanized warfare, where Allied troops pushed through the urban cities in France and Germany in order to defeat and stop the Axis. In Vietnam, our troops had to fight a new and different style of war, which is jungle warfare. They had to adapt to the intense, scorching heat and humidity, which is heavy in itself, but that was the least of their worries, seeing as there were Vietnamese snipers hiding in trees and random kamikaze troops hiding in foxholes throughout the jungles that were being patrolled. Moving on to the current war, and we come across a new type of war once again. Not just the fact that this one takes place in a desert, sandy environment, but the enemy harbors new types of weapons of mass destruction. War has never been clean, nor has it ever been pretty. It has always been dirty and ugly. There is no way to say which war is worse than which, but I would personally say that the most catastrophic things that our troops today have to deal with, that I would personally be most paranoid about, is the IEDs, or improvised explosive devices, aka bombs that are made by hand by terrorists. I could go on and on about the disgustingly creative ways that these terrorists use these bombs not only against us, but against their own people. I will only give a few examples in order to paint a real picture of the differences of all these wars. We know about the countless IEDs which are set on main roads, which are to target heavy infantry vehicles which carry American troops. Another way they use IEDs is they will strap an IED onto another human being who is either willing to die or is usually going to be mentally handicapped. So they will take advantage of them, put the bomb on them, and then they will send them into a crowd of civilians or American troops. And well, you know what happens after that. On the bright side of things, however, after the years and years, after countless sacrifices, and after many, many casualties, the US, with the help of allied countries, we are now getting to the point of the war where we are occupying less and less bases overseas in the Middle East, and every year we are pulling out more and more troops. This is, of course, up until we had what I like to call the Great Scare, because Trump called in a drone strike which killed an Iranian general, which could have potentially started World War III. Thankfully, the Iranian chief said himself that he does not wish death on America nor the American people, that he only wishes death on Trump and those higher ranking military personnel who were personally responsible for the drone strike, which means we avoided a whole war. War is the most raw, unfiltered version of what one man could do to another man for the greater cause that is valued to that individual. This war has lasted through the presidency of 3 different people, but war is something that has happened since the first civilizations were formed, and unfortunately, it will continue to happen long after we are gone and dead. It could even happen again within our lifetimes. It already has once.